Imagine discovering a tower that was deliberately buried, not collapsed by earthquake, not covered by centuries of wind-blown sand, but intentionally entombed by human hands thousands of years ago. In the heart of the Cycladic Islands, on Naxos, Greece, archaeologists uncovered a structure that defies every conventional explanation about ancient building practices. This tower was constructed with sophisticated architectural techniques, stood for a period of time, and then, for reasons no one can explain, was carefully, systematically filled with earth and stones until it vanished beneath the ground. No other structure like it exists in the archaeological record. No ancient text mentions its purpose, and the civilization that built it left no written language to explain why they would invest immense labor in constructing something monumental only to bury it completely. What you're about to discover challenges everything we think we understand about Bronze Age civilizations, their motivations, and their relationship with the structures they built. Today, we're going to explore a mystery that has puzzled archaeologists for decades. A tower that shouldn't exist, buried for reasons we cannot fathom, in a place where ancient secrets still hide beneath Mediterranean soil. Naxos rises from the Aegean Sea like a fortress of marble and myth, the largest of the Cycladic Islands, crowned with mountains that have watched over Mediterranean trade routes for 5,000 years. The landscape here is unlike anywhere else in Greece. Fertile valleys cut between stark white marble peaks, ancient olive groves twisted by millennia of salt wind, and scattered across the interior, mysterious stone ruins that predate classical Greek civilization by thousands of years. The modern town of Naxos spreads along the western coast, its whitewashed buildings climbing the hillside toward the Venetian castle that dominates the harbor. But our destination lies inland, in the central region near the village of Grotta, where in the late 20th century, archaeologists began uncovering evidence of a Bronze Age settlement far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The site sits on elevated ground with commanding views of the surrounding countryside and the sea beyond. As you approach, the terrain appears unremarkable. Low stone walls marking ancient property boundaries, the foundations of simple rectangular buildings typical of Cycladic settlements from 3,000 years ago. Mediterranean vegetation, wild thyme, sage, and tough grasses covers most of the area. But beneath this ordinary surface, archaeologists discovered something extraordinary. Using ground-penetrating radar in the early excavation phases, they detected a massive anomaly, a circular structure buried deep beneath accumulated soil and debris. When excavation began, what emerged was unprecedented in Cycladic archaeology. A tower of carefully constructed stonework, standing several meters high but completely filled with intentional deposits. This was not a collapsed building. This was not gradual accumulation. This was deliberate burial, carried out with the same care and precision as the tower's original construction. The buried Tower of Naxos, as it has come to be known, measures approximately 8 meters in diameter with walls nearly 2 meters thick at the base. The construction technique demonstrates remarkable sophistication for the early Bronze Age period, roughly 3,200 to 2,800 BCE. The builders used a method called ashlar masonry, carefully cut rectangular blocks fitted together with minimal mortar, a technique that wouldn't become common in Greek architecture for another 2,000 years. But here's what makes this impossible to reconcile with our understanding of Bronze Age Cycladic culture. The tower was constructed, used for an unknown purpose, and then methodically filled from bottom to top with alternating layers of earth, pottery fragments, animal bones, and stone rubble. The fill was not random debris. It was organized, stratified, placed with intention. Archaeologists identified distinct layers, each containing specific types of materials, suggesting a ritual or ceremonial process of burial that may have taken months or even years to complete. The precision of the construction itself presents the first major mystery. The stone blocks, some weighing several hundred kilograms, were shaped with tools that should have been incapable of producing such regular surfaces. The Cycladic people of this era worked primarily with obsidian and flint for cutting tools, materials that can shape softer stones but struggle with the hard limestone used in the tower's construction. Modern experimental archaeology has attempted to replicate this stone-cutting precision using Bronze Age technology with limited success. The blocks fit together with joints so tight that the structure has remained stable for 5,000 years, despite lacking any internal framework or buttressing. Even more puzzling, the tower shows no signs of having had a roof structure, no beam holes or corbelling that would support a covering. It appears to have been an open cylinder, deliberately designed to be filled rather than occupied. But the truly impossible aspect is the burial itself. Why would any civilization invest the enormous labor required to construct a monumental stone tower, only to immediately begin the equally laborious process of filling it with tons of earth and debris? The conventional explanation for burying ancient structures involves natural disasters, invasions, or the structure falling into disuse and being repurposed as a convenient waste disposal site. None of these explanations fit the evidence at Naxos. The fill layers contain valuable items, intact pottery, bronze implements, carved stone figurines, objects that Bronze Age people would not simply throw away. The stratigraphy shows careful placement, not dumping, and most significantly, radiocarbon dating of organic materials from different fill layers indicates the burial process occurred within a relatively short time frame after construction, perhaps within a single generation. This was not gradual accumulation. This was purposeful entombment. What do you think? Why would ancient people construct a sophisticated stone tower only to fill it with earth and artifacts shortly after building it? Could this have been some kind of ritual closure, a time capsule, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Establishing the age of the buried tower has proven almost as mysterious as understanding its purpose. Initial excavations in the 1990s, led by Dr. Nota Kuru of the Greek Archaeological Service, used ceramic typology, the classification of pottery styles, to date the structure to the early Cycladic II period, approximately 2800 to 2300 BCE. This dating was based on distinctive pottery fragments found in the fill layers, specifically the frying pan vessels characteristic of that era. However, subsequent investigations have revealed significant complications with this timeline. Radiocarbon dating conducted on charcoal and bone samples from the fill produced dates ranging across a span of nearly 800 years, from 3200 BCE to 2400 BCE, far too broad to pinpoint when the tower was actually built or buried. The problem becomes more complex when we examine the construction technique itself. Ashlar masonry of the quality found in the tower doesn't appear elsewhere in the Cycladic Islands until the Late Bronze Age. Around 1600 BCE, more than 1,000 years after the pottery evidence suggests the tower was built. Dr. Cyclades Masatkat Shum. He suggested two possibilities. Either the dating was incorrect and the tower was actually much younger than the pottery indicated, or the Cycladic people possessed architectural knowledge far earlier than the archaeological record elsewhere suggests. Neither explanation is satisfying. If the tower is younger, why does it contain exclusively early Bronze Age artifacts? If it's older and represents precocious architectural advancement, why don't we see similar techniques anywhere else in the Cyclades during the same period? Adding another layer of confusion, geological analysis of the tower's foundation revealed something unexpected. The structure sits on a prepared base layer containing crushed seashells mixed with lime, a primitive form of concrete not documented in Greek archaeology until Roman times, 3,000 years later. Dr. Maria Nicolaidou a geoarchaeologist from the University of Athens, who studied the foundation in 2015, published findings suggesting the shell-lime mixture showed properties consistent with deliberate engineering to create a stable, water-resistant base. This implies a level of materials science understanding that contradicts everything we know about early Bronze Age capabilities in the region. When pressed on the implications, Dr. Archaeological. Perhaps most troubling of all, legends preserved in later Greek mythology may contain distant echoes of the tower's existence. The poet Cyclades, writing in the 5th century BCE, mentions in passing a stone womb of the giants on Naxos where the gods had buried their secrets. While this could be dismissed as poetic fancy, the specific image of a stone structure associated with burial and secrets on Naxos is provocative. The ancient Greeks themselves, living 2,000 years closer to the tower's construction than we do, seem to regard it as impossibly ancient, built by beings greater than men. If the tower made an impression profound enough to echo through 2 millennia of oral tradition before being written down, what must it have represented to the people who actually built and buried it? Contemporary archaeologists studying the buried Tower of Naxos have developed several theories to explain its purpose and the mysterious burial. The prevailing view, articulated most completely by Dr. Konstantinos Zakos in his comprehensive 2010 study for the Greek Ministry of Culture, suggests that the tower served as a monumental cenotaph, a symbolic tomb or memorial structure never intended for practical use. According to this interpretation, early Cycladic communities, which were developing increasingly complex social hierarchies during this period, may have constructed the tower as a ritual monument honoring a prominent leader, ancestor, or deity. The careful filling of the structure would then represent a ceremonial closing, transforming the tower from a constructed object into a sacred earth mound, a common practice in other Bronze Age cultures, from Britain to the Near East. Dr. Zakos points to parallels with tumulus burials found throughout prehistoric Europe, where chambers were built, filled with grave goods, and then covered with earth to create artificial hills that served as territorial markers and statements of community identity. He suggests that the Cycladic people, who maintained trade contacts with Minoan Crete, Anatolia, and the Near East, may have adopted and adapted this tradition, creating their own unique expression of monumental architecture. The valuable artifacts found in the fill, the pottery, bronze items, and figurines would represent offerings or votive deposits, placed during ceremonial events as the tower was progressively entombed. This would explain why the objects appear deliberately placed, rather than randomly discarded. Supporting this interpretation, archaeologists note that the early Cycladic II period saw significant social changes throughout the islands. Settlements were growing larger, long-distance trade was intensifying, and there's evidence of emerging social stratification with certain families or lineages accumulating more wealth and power than others. Monumental architecture often emerges during such transitional periods as a way for communities to express collective identity and for elites to legitimize their authority. The tower, in this view, represents an experimental phase of monumental construction before the Cycladic people developed the distinctive architectural traditions we see in later periods. The fact that no similar structures have been found might simply indicate that this particular form of monumentalism wasn't successful or sustainable and was therefore abandoned after 1 or 2 attempts. Dr. Irene Nikolakopoulou of the University of Ioannina, who has studied ritual practices in Bronze Age Greece, adds that the tower's cylindrical form and lack of a roof might have been intentional design elements for a structure meant to be filled. She suggests it could have been conceived from the beginning as a kind of ritual vessel, gradually filled over time with offerings and ceremonial deposits until it was complete, and then sealed with a final earth covering. This interpretation positions the tower not as a building that was later buried, but as a burial monument that happened to take the form of a hollow tower during its construction phase. While the mainstream explanation offers a coherent narrative, multiple lines of evidence challenge this interpretation and leave significant questions unanswered. First and most fundamentally, if the tower was intended as a cenotaph or ritual monument from the beginning, why build it with such architectural sophistication? Tumulus burials and ritual mounds elsewhere in the Bronze Age world typically involved simple chambers, or even just pits dug into the ground, then covered with earth. The investment in precisely cut stone blocks, thick load-bearing walls, and an engineered foundation seems wildly disproportionate to the purpose. It's like building a skyscraper-quality structure, only to immediately bury it under a parking lot. The engineering foundation presents particular problems for the ritual monument theory. Dr. Nicolaidou's discovery of the shell-lime concrete base suggests the builders were concerned about long-term structural stability and water resistance, concerns that make sense for a building intended to stand and function for generations, but seem pointless for a structure designed to be buried within years or even months of completion. Why invest in advanced foundation engineering for something meant to vanish underground? The only logical answer is that the builders either didn't initially intend to bury the tower, or the foundation served some other purpose we don't understand. Second, there's the problem of uniqueness. If this represented a cultural practice or ritual tradition of early Cycladic civilization, we should find more examples. The Cycladic islands number in the dozens, with hundreds of Bronze Age sites excavated over the past century. Yet nothing resembling the Naxos Tower has been found anywhere else in the archipelago. Ritual practices and architectural traditions spread through cultures, leaving multiple examples across regions. The singular nature of the Naxos Tower suggests it wasn't a cultural practice at all, but something specific to this location, this time, this group of people. What made Naxos different? What circumstances existed here that didn't exist on Paros, Delos, or Keros? Third, the artifacts found in the fill don't behave like typical votive offerings. Detailed analysis by Dr. Christina Televantu revealed that many of the pottery vessels showed signs of extensive use: worn bases, carbonized food residues, repair work with ancient glue made from tree resin. These were everyday objects from daily life, not special ceremonial pieces created for ritual deposition. The bronze items included broken tools and damaged weapons, again suggesting disposal of used goods rather than sacrifice of valuable offerings. If the tower burial was a ceremonial event significant enough to warrant building a monumental stone structure, why fill it with broken household goods rather than prestige items? The artifact assemblage looks more like the contents of a domestic trash midden than a sacred offering deposit. Most puzzling of all is the speed of the burial. Radiocarbon dates cluster within a narrow time range, suggesting the entire process of filling the 8-meter-high, several-meter-diameter cylinder took perhaps 20 to 30 years at most, rapid by archaeological standards. For context, major tumulus burials in Bronze Age Europe often accumulated over centuries, with successive generations adding to the mound. The Naxos Tower appears to have been filled in essentially one sustained effort, perhaps within the lifespan of a single generation. This urgency contradicts the gradual ceremonial deposition that the ritual monument theory requires. It suggests instead a deliberate project to hide or seal the tower quickly, perhaps in response to some specific event or crisis. Finally, there's the testimony of the landscape itself. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted around the tower site have revealed anomalies suggesting additional buried structures nearby, not yet excavated due to funding limitations and the Greek Archaeological Service's focus on more threatened sites. If these anomalies prove to be similar towers or related structures, it would fundamentally change our understanding of what was happening at Naxos in the Bronze Age. But even the possibility of other buried structures raises an uncomfortable question. How many more are out there, still hidden beneath the seemingly empty landscapes of the Cyclades. Several researchers have proposed alternative explanations that attempt to account for the contradictions and anomalies surrounding the buried tower. Dr. Eberhard Zanger, a Swiss geoarchaeologist known for his work on ancient natural disasters, has suggested that the tower's burial might have been a response to environmental catastrophe. The early Bronze Age in the Aegean saw several periods of intense seismic activity and volcanic eruptions, most famously the Thera eruption around 1600 BCE, but also earlier events that left traces in geological records. Zanger proposes that a major earthquake or tsunami might have devastated the Naxos community, and survivors ritually buried the tower as part of a cultural response to the disaster, a way of symbolically closing one era and beginning another. This would explain the relatively rapid burial and the inclusion of everyday objects that might have belonged to disaster victims. Dr. Adamantios Sampson, director of excavations at several Cycladic sites, offers a different perspective. He suggests the tower might have been an experimental construction, perhaps a test structure for developing new building techniques. The Cycladic people were accomplished sailors and traders, in contact with the more advanced civilizations of Minoan Crete and coastal Anatolia. Sampson proposes they may have been attempting to replicate architectural styles seen elsewhere, and when the experiment proved unsuccessful, or the knowledge couldn't be properly transferred, they abandoned the project and buried the structure to clear the site. This would explain the advanced techniques that seem out of place for the era, and the lack of similar structures elsewhere. Failed experiments typically don't get repeated. A more controversial theory comes from Dr. Lina Papazoglou Manioudaki, former director of the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. She has drawn attention to the tower's similarity to certain structures described in later Greek religious texts as offering pits or chthonic chambers, sacred spaces where communities could make offerings directly to underworld deities. These weren't intended as buildings, but as architectural conduits between the surface world and the realm below. The tower, in this interpretation, was designed to be filled from the beginning, with the filling itself constituting the religious act. Each layer of deposit would represent a different offering or petition to underground powers, with the final sealing creating a permanent connection between the mortal community and the divine realm below. This theory has gained attention because it explains both the sophisticated construction and the intentional burial, positioning them as two phases of a single religious project. Engineer and experimental archaeologist George Papageorgiou has approached the mystery from a more technical angle. After studying the tower's construction in detail, he noted that the wall thickness, cylindrical shape, and foundation design are remarkably similar to features of ancient water cisterns found in arid regions of the Near East. He proposes that the tower might have been designed to collect and store water, with the sophisticated foundation preventing seepage. When the system failed, perhaps because the builders didn't understand local hydrology or the limestone bedrock proved too porous, they may have converted the failed cistern into a refuse disposal pit, explaining the everyday artifacts in the fill. This pragmatic interpretation has appeal because it explains the engineering sophistication through functional necessity rather than ritual mystery. Each of these theories addresses some aspects of the evidence while leaving others unexplained. The disaster response theory accounts for rapid burial, but doesn't explain why such care was taken with the fill stratigraphy. The experimental construction theory explains the advanced techniques, but struggles with the question of why resources would be wasted on tests that weren't actually used. The ritual offering pit theory provides religious motivation, but relies heavily on much later texts that might not reflect Bronze Age practices, and the failed cistern theory, while practical, doesn't explain the apparent ritual character of the fill deposits. The tower continues to resist easy categorization, suggesting that perhaps our modern frameworks for understanding ancient structures Our categories of religious, practical, monumental, domestic don't quite fit the mental world of the people who built it. Which explanation resonates most with you? Was this tower a religious monument, a failed engineering project, or a response to some crisis we can barely imagine from 5,000 years distance? Could there be an explanation that hasn't occurred to modern researchers at all? Let us know your perspective in the comments. The buried tower itself is only the most dramatic of several unexplained features discovered at the Naxos site. During excavations in the early 2000s, archaeologists uncovered a series of stone-lined pits arranged in a precise circular pattern around the tower, each approximately 2 meters deep and 1 meter in diameter. These pits were also intentionally filled, but with a very different type of deposit, almost exclusively burnt bone fragments, charcoal, and ash, with virtually no pottery or metal objects. Analysis of the bones revealed they came from juvenile animals, primarily sheep and goats less than 6 months old, all killed at approximately the same time based on bone development stages. The burning patterns on the bones suggest controlled high-temperature fires maintained for extended periods, not the quick, hot blazes of cooking fires. The sheer quantity of young animals represented, her analysis suggests at least 200 individuals, and the fact that they were killed simultaneously points to a massive sacrificial event or feast. But the puzzling aspect is the burial. If this was a feast, where are the remains of the human celebration, the serving vessels, the tools, the personal items typically associated with communal gatherings? If it was sacrifice, why bury the offerings in separate pits rather than in the tower itself? The spatial relationship suggests these pits and the tower were part of a single complex or ritual system, but how they function together remains unclear. Even more intriguing, excavations 500 meters from the tower uncovered what appears to be a deliberate cache of stone tools, thousands of obsidian blades, scrapers, and cores buried together in a single large pit. Obsidian sourcing analysis conducted by Dr. Colin Renfrew's team using X-ray fluorescence to identify the volcanic source of the volcanic glass revealed that the obsidian came from the island of Melos, over 100 kilometers away across open water. This represents a significant accumulation of imported raw material and finished tools, perhaps representing months or years of trade. Yet here it all was, buried in a single deposit, along with the products of what must have been hundreds of hours of skilled knapping work. The conventional explanation, that this was simply a storage cache that was never retrieved, seems inadequate given the scale. Storage caches are typically recovered by their owners. This obsidian was deliberately entombed, just like the tower, suggesting a pattern of intentional abandonment or ritual closure that extends beyond the tower itself to encompass the broader settlement. Beneath the tower, excavators made one final puzzling discovery. The bedrock into which the foundation was set had been carved with a series of channels and basins, forming an interconnected system that appears designed to direct water flow. The channels are too sophisticated to be natural erosion patterns. They show evidence of tooling and deliberate shaping. Some researchers have suggested these might be remnants of an earlier structure on the site, predating the tower itself, but if so, this pushes the mystery even deeper in time. What was this earlier structure? Why was it also apparently designed to interact with water in some way? And why would the tower builders choose to construct their monument directly atop these earlier installations? Dr. Nodakuru has suggested that perhaps the location itself was considered sacred or significant, drawing multiple generations to build there, each leaving their own architectural puzzle for future generations to decipher. Today, the buried Tower of Naxos remains partially excavated, with roughly two-thirds of the structure exposed, while the remaining section stays buried for conservation purposes and to preserve material for future analysis using techniques that don't yet exist. The site is not generally open to tourists. though specialists can arrange visits through the Greek Archaeological Service. This isolation has helped preserve the structure, but it also means that the tower remains largely unknown outside academic circles, a profound mystery hiding in plain sight on one of Greece's most visited islands. Recent developments have brought new attention to the site. In 2019, a team from the University of Bradford used advanced photogrammetry and 3D laser scanning to create a detailed digital model of the exposed portions of the tower. This allowed researchers worldwide to examine the structure virtually, leading to several new observations. Dr. Michael J. Boyd, analyzing the digital scans, identified subtle asymmetries in the wall construction that might indicate the tower was built by multiple work crews using slightly different techniques, possibly suggesting a community effort rather than specialized builders. Other researchers examining the same data disagree, arguing the variations are too minor to support that conclusion and more likely reflect adaptive responses to variations in the stone blocks themselves. In 2021, the Greek Ministry of Culture approved a new phase of investigation using ground-penetrating radar and electrical resistivity tomography to map the subsurface around the tower site in greater detail than previous surveys. The results, published in preliminary form in 2023, confirmed the presence of at least 3 additional buried anomalies of similar size and shape to the tower, located within a 200-meter radius. Excavation of these features has been proposed but not yet funded, leaving tantalizing questions about whether the buried tower was truly unique or part of a broader landscape of intentionally entombed structures. If multiple towers were buried at roughly the same time, it would transform this from an isolated mystery into evidence of a major cultural shift or historical event affecting the entire community. Meanwhile, materials science continues to probe the tower's construction secrets. In 2022, researchers from the National Technical University of Athens extracted microscopic samples from the mortar joints between stones, finding traces of organic compounds that might represent plant-based additives mixed into the lime mortar, a sophistication in construction chemistry not documented elsewhere in the Cyclades until much later periods. Analysis is ongoing, but early results suggest the Cycladic builders had a more advanced understanding of materials engineering than the archaeological community has generally credited them with. Each new technological approach reveals another layer of complexity, another hint that the people who built this tower knew more than we've assumed. The tower has also attracted attention from interdisciplinary researchers interested in archaeoastronomy and landscape archaeology. Preliminary studies by Dr. Efrosini Boutsikis of the University of Kent suggest that the tower's position in the landscape aligns with the sunrise on the summer solstice when viewed from a prominent hilltop sanctuary 3 kilometers away. Whether this alignment is intentional or coincidental remains debated, but it raises the possibility that the tower was part of a broader sacred landscape, visible and functionally integrated with other ritual sites across the region. If true, its burial would have fundamentally altered this landscape, removing a key landmark or sightline, an act with profound symbolic implications. Despite all this research, the fundamental questions remain unanswered. Archaeologists cannot agree on when the tower was built, why it was built, how it was built with such precision, or why it was buried. Every new technique reveals additional complexity rather than providing clarity. The tower resists interpretation, standing as a 5,000-year-old testament to the limits of archaeological understanding and the vast depths of knowledge that ancient peoples possessed, but did not preserve in forms we can easily decode. Standing before the buried tower of Naxos, or more accurately, standing in the excavation pit beside its exposed walls, you cannot escape a profound sense of temporal vertigo. Here is a structure that witnessed the rise of Bronze Age civilization, that was already ancient when the Minoans built their palaces on Crete, that was buried beneath the earth before the Trojan War, before the Iliad, before everything we think of as the beginning of Western civilization. The people who built it lived and died without leaving us their names, their stories, or their explanations. They invested immense labor in creating something monumental, and then invested equally immense labor in making it disappear. Why? Perhaps the answer lies not in understanding their specific motivations, but in recognizing that human societies across time have always had reasons for their actions that made perfect sense within their own cultural logic, even when those reasons become opaque to later observers. The tower stands as a humbling reminder that ancient peoples were not simply primitive versions of ourselves, stumbling toward our modern enlightenment. They were fully complex humans, with sophisticated beliefs, advanced knowledge in their own domains, and concerns that might be so different from ours that we lack even the conceptual framework to understand them. The burial of the tower was clearly meaningful to them. That it remains mysterious to us says more about the distance between our worldviews than about the intelligence or capability of its builders. What we call mystery in archaeology might better be called silence. The silence left when a culture's internal logic, its taken for granted assumptions and meanings, aren't transmitted forward in forms we can decode. The Greeks of the classical period, living 2,000 years closer to the tower's construction than we do, already found it mysterious enough to weave into mythology. If even they couldn't understand it clearly, perhaps we should accept that some silences are permanent, that some questions echo across time without answers, and that this is not a failure, but simply the nature of deep history. Yet the search continues because it must. Each mystery that resists solution pushes us to develop better tools, ask better questions, and think more carefully about our assumptions. The buried tower of Naxos has already taught us that Cycladic Bronze Age architecture was more sophisticated than we believed, that ritual practices were more complex than we assumed, and that the relationship between building and burial, between creation and concealment, held meanings we haven't fully explored. Whatever its original purpose, its modern purpose is clear: to challenge us, to humble us, and to remind us that human history extends far deeper than our understanding. But if the intentional burial of a sophisticated structure on a Greek island seems incomprehensible, what we're about to explore next will challenge your understanding of ancient engineering in a completely different way. We're leaving the Mediterranean now, traveling to the windswept plains of southern England, where massive stones arranged in precise patterns have stood for nearly 5,000 years, and where recent discoveries have revealed that what we thought we knew about this iconic site was fundamentally incomplete. The mystery we're heading toward is one that every school child learns about, but that continues to yield secrets that rewrite the story of prehistoric Britain. We are taught that Stonehenge is a circle of stones on an empty plain, a singular monument built by ancient Britons and left standing in isolation for millennia. But this comfortable narrative is entirely wrong. Beneath the grasslands surrounding the iconic stone circle lies an enormous complex of buried structures, ritual pathways, and earthworks that archaeologists have only recently begun to understand. A sacred landscape so vast and sophisticated that Stonehenge itself was merely one component of a massive ceremonial infrastructure spanning several square kilometers. Advanced technology has revealed pit circles, timber structures, and earthen monuments hidden just below the surface, invisible to the eye, but undeniably present in the ground. Some of these features predate Stonehenge by 1,000 years. Others were added centuries after its construction. Together they form an integrated ritual landscape that evolved over 3,000 years, constantly rebuilt and reimagined by successive generations who saw this place as uniquely sacred. We think we know Stonehenge because we can see its standing stones. But what we cannot see, what remained hidden until the 21st century, tells a far stranger story about the ambitions and capabilities of Neolithic Britain. Stonehenge stands on the Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, southern England, a landscape of rolling chalk grassland that stretches for miles in every direction. The modern visitor approaches via the A344 road, which until recently ran directly past the stones before being removed and returned to grassland in 2013 to restore something closer to the monument's original setting. As you walk toward the stone circle from the visitor center, the scale gradually becomes apparent. The sarsen stones, the massive upright pillars that form the outer circle, rise over 4 meters high and weigh approximately 25 tons each. They support horizontal lintel stones, some still in place after 4,500 years, creating the distinctive trilithon structures that have become Stonehenge's signature image. But the stones themselves are only the beginning. The monument sits within a circular earthwork bank and ditch, 300 feet in diameter, that predates the stone construction by several centuries. This earthwork defines the temenos, the sacred precinct, but extends far beyond what most visitors realize. The avenue, a parallel pair of banks and ditches, stretches from the entrance of the stone circle northeast toward the river Avon, over 2 kilometers away. Walking this route, you begin to understand that Stonehenge was not a destination, but a node in a network, connected by ritual pathways to other sites scattered across the landscape. To the south lies the Cursus, one of the most enigmatic Neolithic monuments in Britain. A massive earthwork enclosure stretching for nearly 3 kilometers, oriented east-west, with no obvious practical function. To the north and west, the land is dotted with burial mounds called barrows, hundreds of them, creating a necropolis that surrounds Stonehenge like a city of the dead. The area feels heavy with human intention, every feature of the landscape shaped by hands and tools over thousands of years. The modern visitor sees grass and stones, but archaeologists see layers upon layers of construction, ritual, burial, and meaning, accumulated over a span of time longer than all of recorded Western history. And beneath it all, invisible without technology, lies the hidden landscape, a realm of buried structures that has fundamentally changed our understanding of what Stonehenge was and what it meant to the people who built it. In 2015, the Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes Project, a collaboration between the University of Birmingham and the Ludwig Boltzmann Institute for Archaeological Prospection, completed the most comprehensive geophysical survey ever conducted of the area surrounding Stonehenge. Using a combination of ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, and electromagnetic induction sensors, they mapped over 12 square kilometers of landscape to a depth of 3 meters below the surface. What they discovered was extraordinary. At least 17 previously unknown ritual monuments, hundreds of burial pits, dozens of massive post holes indicating timber structures long since rotted away, and a remarkable feature located just 900 meters from Stonehenge itself, a vast arc of deep pits, each measuring over 5 meters in diameter and extending more than 5 meters deep, arranged in a precise circle over 2 kilometers in circumference. This feature, called the Durrington Shafts, consists of at least 20 large pits forming a boundary around the Neolithic settlement of Durrington Walls. The pits were dug with antler picks and wooden shovels sometime around 2500 BCE, contemporary with Stonehenge's major stone phase. Each pit would have required the excavation of approximately 100 cubic meters of chalk bedrock, backbreaking work that would take a team of laborers weeks to complete. The precision of their placement is what staggers archaeologists. The pits form a nearly perfect circle over 2 kilometers in diameter, meaning that whoever designed this feature had the ability to maintain geometric accuracy across a distance of roughly 1.25 miles, using only Neolithic surveying techniques. Dr. Vince Gaffney, who led the survey project, stated in a 2020 interview that the level of planning and coordination required to create this circle of shafts challenges everything we thought we knew about Neolithic organizational capabilities. This wasn't a gradual development or a loose arrangement. The pits are not randomly scattered but maintain consistent spacing around the circuit, with deviations from perfect circularity of less than 3%, a level of accuracy difficult to achieve even with modern tools over such distances. The question that no one can answer is, how did Neolithic people, working without metal tools, without writing systems to record plans, without any of the surveying instruments we take for granted, achieve this precision? But the impossibility deepens when we consider what else the survey revealed. Between Stonehenge and the Durrington shafts, the subsurface scanning detected at least 2 timber circles, massive circular structures composed of hundreds of wooden posts arranged in concentric rings. These structures existed during the same period that Stonehenge's stones were being erected, creating a landscape where stone and timber monuments coexisted as part of an integrated ceremonial complex. The larger of the timber circles, located at Durrington Walls itself, measured 30 meters in diameter and required an estimated 600 mature oak trees to construct, representing an enormous investment of resources in a landscape where suitable timber was not abundant. What makes this particularly impossible to reconcile with our understanding of Neolithic society is the sheer scale of coordinated labor and resources involved. Building Stonehenge itself required moving bluestones from Wales, 240 kilometers away, then shaping and erecting sarsen stones weighing 25 tons each. Simultaneously, other crews were digging massive shafts in perfect circles kilometers away, while still others were felling forests to construct timber circles and maintaining the earthwork monuments that preceded all of these structures. The conventional view of Neolithic Britain imagines small, scattered communities of farmers, occasionally coming together for seasonal gatherings and modest construction projects. This hidden landscape suggests instead a sophisticated, organized society capable of managing multiple massive engineering projects simultaneously over generations, a level of social complexity that shouldn't exist for another 2,000 years until the rise of Bronze Age chiefdoms. How do you explain the precision? What techniques could Neolithic people, without metal tools or writing, have used to lay out perfect circles over distances of more than 2 kilometers? Was there knowledge we've completely underestimated? Or is something else going on? Share your thoughts below. The timeline of Stonehenge's construction has grown increasingly complex as new discoveries emerge. Originally, archaeologists believed the site was built in a single phase around 2500 BCE. We now know the monument evolved over at least 1,500 years. With the earliest features, the circular ditch and bank, dating to approximately 3000 BCE. The famous sarsen stone circle came much later, around 2500 BCE, while the bluestones were rearranged multiple times across centuries. But the recently discovered Durrington shafts have created a chronological puzzle. Radiocarbon dating of organic material from the pit fills suggests they were dug around 2500 BCE, contemporary with Stonehenge's stone phase. Yet some researchers argue the fills might have been deposited later, meaning the pits themselves could be older. Dr. Mike Parker Pearson of University College London has suggested the entire landscape might represent a 1,000-year construction project, with each generation adding new elements to an ever-evolving sacred geography. If true, this implies a continuity of religious belief, an architectural vision across 40 generations, an almost incomprehensible span of cultural memory for a pre-literate society. Archaeologists explain Stonehenge and its surrounding landscape as the ceremonial center of a widespread Neolithic culture that flourished across southern Britain. The scale of construction, they argue, reflects the pooling of labor from multiple communities during seasonal gatherings, perhaps during summer and winter solstices. The timber circles at Durrington Walls may have housed participants in these ceremonies, while Stonehenge itself served as the focal point for rituals involving the dead. The avenue connecting Stonehenge to the river suggests processions carrying cremated remains for deposition within the monument. Dr. Kriege and Dr. Parker Pearson's research has demonstrated that the stones align with solstice sunrise and sunset, indicating sophisticated astronomical knowledge used to structure ritual calendars. The hidden structures discovered by ground-penetrating radar in this view represent additional ceremonial features built over centuries as the sacred landscape expanded and evolved. While the organizational capability required is impressive, mainstream archaeology maintains that motivated communities working seasonally over generations could accomplish these feats without requiring any lost technology or knowledge beyond what we know existed in Neolithic Britain. Yet significant problems remain. The Durrington shaft's precision across 2 kilometers cannot be easily explained by existing models of Neolithic surveying. Experimental archaeology has failed to replicate such accuracy using proposed ancient techniques. Additionally, the timber circles required 600 oak trees, representing the felling of several acres of forest. Pollen analysis of the period shows the landscape was already largely deforested for agriculture. Where did the timber come from? How was it transported? And why invest such resources in structures that would rot within decades, requiring constant rebuilding? The sheer scale of simultaneous projects, stone construction at Stonehenge, pit digging at Durrington, timber circles, earthworks, pathways, implies a population density and organizational hierarchy far beyond what evidence from settlement archaeology supports. Where did everyone live? Where are the houses, the workshops, the evidence of the thousands of people needed for these projects? Some researchers propose that Stonehenge was built by a centralized chiefdom with the authority to command labor from surrounding regions, similar to later Bronze Age societies. Others suggest it was a pilgrimage site drawing participants from across Britain and even continental Europe, with construction happening during brief intensive gatherings. A minority view, championed by geologist Brian John, argues that some bluestones may have been glacially transported rather than moved by humans, though most archaeologists reject this interpretation. The mystery of the precision and scale continues to generate debate, with no consensus on how Neolithic people achieved what seems beyond their supposed capabilities. What's more impressive, the visible stones we can see, or the hidden landscape of buried structures that surrounded them? Does knowing about this vast sacred geography change how you think about Stonehenge? Share your perspective in the comments. Recent excavations have revealed another puzzle: evidence of feasting on an enormous scale at Durrington Walls. Analysis of animal bones shows that thousands of pigs were slaughtered and consumed during midwinter gatherings, many driven from as far as Scotland based on isotope analysis of their teeth. This suggests Stonehenge drew people from across Britain, yet we have almost no evidence of where these visitors stayed or how such massive gatherings were organized. Additionally, some of the buried pits contain unusual deposits, chalk objects carved into geometric shapes, pig skulls arranged in patterns, and in one case an entire articulated auroch skeleton, an extinct wild ox of tremendous size. These deposits suggest ritual practices far more complex than simple feasting or ancestor worship, practices whose meanings remain completely opaque to modern researchers. Stonehenge remains one of the most intensively studied archaeological sites in the world. In 2020, archaeologists discovered the origins of the sarsen stones using geochemical analysis, pinpointing a source in West Woods, 25 kilometers north of Stonehenge. Meanwhile, analysis of the Durrington shafts continues, with researchers using environmental DNA sampling to understand what the landscape looked like when the monuments were active. The site's designation as a UNESCO World Heritage Site ensures preservation but also limits the scope of invasive excavation. Most future discoveries will likely come from remote sensing technologies that probe without disturbing the ground. Each technological advance reveals more hidden complexity, more evidence that what we see above ground represents a tiny fraction of what ancient Britons created here. Throughout this journey across ancient mysteries, from the buried Tower of Naxos to the hidden landscape of Stonehenge, a pattern emerges. The ancient world was not simpler than ours. It was different, operating according to logic and priorities that become invisible across millennia. The tower builders of Naxos had reasons for burial that made perfect sense within their worldview. The Stonehenge architects possessed knowledge of landscape and ceremony that we can barely reconstruct. These weren't primitive peoples stumbling toward civilization. They were fully realized human societies with sophisticated beliefs, impressive capabilities, and concerns that might have been more profound than our own. The mysteries endure not because ancient peoples were mysterious, but because time is a veil that grows thicker with each passing century. We peer through it using science, technology, and imagination, catching glimpses of truth but never quite seeing clearly. Perhaps this is appropriate. Perhaps mysteries are meant to remain, reminding us that human knowledge is always partial, always provisional, always humbled by the vast unknown that surrounds our small island of understanding. The stones stand, the towers lie buried, and we continue asking questions, because that is what humans do. We seek understanding across the silence of ages, hoping that each question brings us closer to the truth. What do you think about these enduring mysteries? Do they frustrate you? Or do you find beauty in the unanswered questions? Which of the sites we've explored today fascinates you most? And what would you want to ask the ancient builders if you could speak with them across the gulf of time? Share your final thoughts in the comments below, and let us know what archaeological mysteries you'd like us to explore next. The past is never truly past. It echoes in stones and earth, in patterns we're only beginning to recognize, in questions that have no answers but infinite possibilities. And somewhere, beneath Mediterranean soil or English grassland, more mysteries wait to be discovered, ready to challenge everything we think we know once again.